Clara Bennett didn't cry when they emptied her desk. She didn't cry when they nailed the letter to her door. She waited until the road stretched empty ahead of her bag in hand boots on the dirt, and then she lifted her chin so high it looked like pride. Because it was. Before you hear what happened next, subscribe to this channel and come along for the ride. Drop your city in the comments below. Let's see how far this story travels. The letter had been pinned to the schoolhouse door with a single rusted nail. Clara saw it from across the road and something in her chest tightened before she even reached it. She knew what it would say. She had known since the town meeting 3 nights ago when the men sat in rows and the women stood along the wall, and not one of them, not a single one, had spoken her name with anything other than venom. She pulled the nail free with her thumbnail and unfolded the paper. By order of the Harlow County School Board, Miss Clara Bennett is hereby relieved of her duties, effective immediately pending the outcome of the investigation into her conduct. She is further advised to vacate the schoolhouse residence within 48 hours. 48 hours. She folded the letter in half, then in half again. Then she put it in her coat pocket, turned around and walked back to the small 2-room house that attached to the back of the schoolhouse where she had lived for 3 years. Inside, she sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment. Then she started to pack. She didn't take much. A worn leather satchel, soft from years of carrying lesson books and chalk boxes. 2 dresses, the sturdier ones, the kind that survived weather. Her mother's Bible, its spine cracked from actual use. A small tin of her father's letters tied with kitchen twine. A pair of extra boots. A winter coat she folded flat. Everything else, the framed embroidery on the wall, the ceramic pitcher, the curtains she'd sewn herself, she left. It didn't seem worth the wait. She was buckled the satchel when she heard the first knock. It wasn't polite. It was the kind of knock that announced itself like a statement. She opened the door. Margaret Hollis stood on the step, arms crossed, chin lifted the way women lifted their chins when they had decided they were righteous. "I thought I should come see for myself," Margaret said, "whether you had any shame at all." Clara looked at her for a moment. Margaret was the wife of the school board chairman. She had been one of the women along the wall at the meeting. She had not spoken, but her silence had the weight of agreement. "Good morning, Mrs. Hollis," Clara said. "It's not a good morning for Harlow. I want you to know that. The damage you've done—" "What damage have I done exactly?" Clara's voice stayed level. She had been practicing level for 3 days. "Tell me specifically." Margaret's eyes flickered. "You know what you did." "I know what I'm accused of. That isn't the same thing." Thomas Carey's boy failed his examinations twice," Clara said. "His father wanted me to pass him regardless. I refused. 2 weeks later, I am accused of what exactly the charge keeps changing. First it was improper conduct, then it was dishonesty. Then it was that I had been seen in company unsuitable for a schoolteacher." She tilted her head slightly. "I have been seen speaking with the circuit preacher, Mrs. Hollis. I'm not certain that qualifies." Margaret's mouth thinned. "The board made their decision." "The board made the decision Thomas Carey wanted them to make," Clara said, "because Thomas Carey owns the mill, the grain warehouse, and half the mortgages in this county, and because men like that do not accept the word no from women like me." She stepped back. "Is there anything else you needed?" Margaret stared at her. Then she turned and walked away without answering. Clara closed the door. She stood with her hand on the wood for a moment, and something in her throat burned, but she swallowed it back down. She picked up the satchel. The main street of Harlow, Wyoming, was 200 yards of packed dirt, and on a Wednesday morning in July, it was already shimmering with heat. The mountains stood blue and distant to the north, their peaks white even in summer, indifferent to everything happening below them. Clara walked with her satchel on her shoulder and her back straight. She had decided she would go to her cousin's place in Cartwell, 2 counties east. She had met her cousin Sarah exactly twice in her life, but Sarah had written her once, years ago, a brief and cheerful letter, and she seemed like the kind of woman who would let someone sleep on her floor while they figured out what came next. It was the only plan Clara had. She passed Harding's General Store. Through the window she could see women inside, 3 of them, who stopped what they were doing to watch her. One of them said something she couldn't hear. Another shook her head. Clara looked straight ahead. She passed the post office. The postmaster, Mr. Feld, stood in the doorway. He didn't say anything. He just watched with the expression of a man watching something he'd expected. She passed the barber, the livery, the surveyor's office where Thomas Carey had his secondary business dealings, the one that required fewer witnesses than his primary ones. She was almost at the edge of town, almost to where the road opened up and pointed east toward Cartwell, when she heard a sound behind her that she had not expected. A single horse, moving at a walk. She didn't turn around. The horse pulled alongside her and stopped. "Miss Bennett?" The voice was low and even. She turned. She knew who he was by sight. Everyone in Harlow County did, in the same way they knew the shape of the mountains, something present in the background of everything. Ethan Walker. He ran the high country operation north of town, 3,000 acres of summer grazing land, up near the ridge, where the grass grew thick and cold, and the cattle fattened on it every year between June and September. He came down to town for supplies for business at the land office, and not for much else. How was a big man? Not enormous, but built in the way of someone who had been doing physical work for 20 years and had let it shape him without thinking about it. He had a jaw that was all plains, and a pair of eyes that were the particular gray-green of mountain water, and he was watching her from under the brim of his hat, with an expression that was not pity and was not judgment. She had never spoken to him directly. She wasn't sure many people had. "Mr. Walker," she said. "You heading east?" he asked. "Yes. On foot." "I don't own a horse," she said. It came out more flat than she intended. He looked at the satchel on her shoulder. Then he looked at the road ahead of her, all of it stretching empty and hot in the July sun, and she could see him calculating something. "Stage doesn't run through Cartwell," he said. "Closest stop's at Millhaven. That's 9 miles. "I'm aware of the geography. 9 miles in this heat." He glanced up at the sky. "And a storm moving in off the peaks by afternoon." She looked at him steadily. "Mr. Walker, is there something you wanted to say, or are you telling me about the weather?" Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite amusement. Something quieter than that. "I was at the town meeting," he said. Her chin lifted half an inch. "Then you heard everything that was said about me." "I heard everything that was said," he agreed. "That ain't the same as believing it." She stared at him. He reached up and adjusted his hat, not nervously, just as a man adjusts things when he's thinking. "Thomas Carey's been trying to acquire water rights on the creek that runs through my north grazing land for 4 years. I've told him no 4 times. He's a man who doesn't like being told no." He paused. "By anyone seems like." Clara felt something shift slightly in her chest. "Are you saying," she said slowly, "that you believe he fabricated the accusation against me?" "I'm saying Thomas Carey has a very particular way of handling obstacles," Ethan said. "And you were between him and something he wanted." She looked at the ground for a moment. The dirt was pale with dust cracked from weeks without rain. "It doesn't matter what I believe or what you believe," she said. "The board has made their decision. There's nothing left for me in Harlow." "No," he said. "Maybe not." He was quiet for a moment. A horse, somewhere in the distance, made a sound, and the wind came down off the mountains, briefly carrying the smell of pine and something cooler. "I've got a problem," he said. "Up at my operation. I've been running cattle and managing the summer operation for 15 years with one foreman and a rotating crew. But my foreman broke his leg in April, won't be back to full strength until fall. And I've got ranch records correspondence with buyers in Denver, accounts for the season work that needs doing, and I don't have someone who can do it." He looked at her. "I need someone who can read, write, and add numbers without making a mess of it. And who can be trusted." Clara said nothing. "I'm not offering charity," he said. "I'm offering work, honest work. Fair wages, same as I'd pay a qualified clerk in a town with clerks available. 3 months through the end of summer season. Room and board included." She looked up at him. He met her gaze without blinking. Mr. Walker, she said, I have been accused of conduct unbecoming a schoolteacher. If I ride up to your ranch unmarried with no family connection to you, the talk about me will be worse. The talk about you, he said quietly, is already about as bad as they can make it. He paused. And up in the high country, there's no one around to talk. She considered him for a long moment. Why? She said. You don't know me. We've spoken 4 sentences to each other in 3 years. Why would you go to this trouble for someone you don't know? He thought about that. It was not the pause of a man making something up. It was the pause of a man who actually meant to tell the truth. Because I watched what happened in that room, he said. I watched 20 people decide what kind of person you were based on what Thomas Carey needed them to believe, and not one of them asked for your side of it. And I watched you stand there and not break. Something shifted in his jaw. That ain't something I can just ride past. Clara Bennett stood on the road in the July heat with her satchel on her shoulder and 9 miles between her and the nearest stage stop. She thought about Sarah in Cartwell, who she had met twice. She thought about the letter in her coat pocket still folded in quarters. She thought about Thomas Carey's face at the town meeting, the careful, satisfied blankness of a man who has gotten what he came for. She thought about 3 years of lesson plans and school mornings and the children's faces when a thing finally clicked into understanding. And she thought about this man on a horse who had ridden down a mountain in July to stop on a road and offer her wages instead of sympathy. If I come, she said, I'm there as an employee, nothing more. That's all I'm asking, he said. I'll do the records, the correspondence, the accounts. I'll earn my wages. I'd expect nothing less. And when the season ends, she said, I'll go on to whatever comes next. That's your right, he said. She was quiet for one more moment. I don't even know what your ranch is called, she said. The Walker Ridge outfit, he said. Most people just call it the Ridge. She nodded once. Then she walked to his horse's side and looked up at him. He shifted his weight in the saddle and extended his hand, and she took it, and he helped her up behind him with no more ceremony than if he'd picked up a sack of grain from a porch. Behind them on the main street of Harlow, at least a dozen people had found reasons to be outside. None of them said anything. They just watched. Clara didn't look back. The road north out of Harlow climbed steadily, and within 2 miles, the town was gone behind a fold in the terrain. The heat thinned as they gained elevation, and the pines began tall and straight on either side of the road, and the air coming down off the peaks was different up here, cooler, with a smell of something clean under the resin and dust. Ethan Walker rode without talking, and Clara discovered that she didn't mind it. She had spent 3 days talking, defending herself, explaining herself, trying to be heard by people who had already decided, and silence felt like something she could breathe in. After a while she said, "How many hands do you run up here?" 8 during summer season, he said. Crew comes up in June, goes back down in September. Good men, most of them. Worked with me 4-5 years. And your foreman, Danner, Cal Danner. He'll be laid up until at least late August. He can run the men from a chair at the bunkhouse, but he can't ride, can't handle the physical work. The records and correspondence have been piling up since April. A pause. I'm not good at paperwork. What are you good at? She asked. It came out more direct than she meant. He seemed to take no offense. Mountains, he said simply. Cattle. Working out what a storm is going to do before it does it. Reading land. She thought about that. That seems like enough, she said. It's enough for the work, he said. It's not enough for everything. She didn't ask what he meant. The road curved up through a stand of aspens, their leaves catching the light in that particular silver-green way aspens did in July, flickering as the wind came through them. How long have you run the ridge? She asked. 12 years, he said. Bought the original 300 acres when I was 23. Built it up from there. Alone. Mostly. He shifted the reins. My father helped me with the first fence lines. He died 7 years ago. There's just the operation now. Clara filed that away. A man who had built something alone out of mountain land, who did not talk about it as an accomplishment, but simply as a fact. She was beginning to understand something about the particular economy of his words. "Mr. Walker," she said at the meeting, "you were in the back. I saw you. I think I saw you, but you didn't speak." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "I didn't." "Why not?" The pause this time was longer. The horse moved beneath them, steady on the climbing road. "Because I didn't have evidence," he said. "What I had was a strong opinion about Thomas Carey and a gut feeling about you." Opinions and feelings don't carry weight in a public meeting in this county. Carey's got the board in his pocket, and standing up to say so without proof would have just made me a target and wouldn't have helped you. He paused again. "What I could do was wait." "And this," Clara said. "This is waiting. This is acting on what I actually have," he said, "which is work that needs doing and a person who can do it. And time. Time has a way of making the truth harder to ignore." She sat with that for a while. The trees thickened on either side, and the road narrowed to a track, and then the track opened again, and she saw ahead of them, set back against the base of the ridge, the first buildings of the Walker operation. A main house of weathered timber, a bunkhouse, 2 barns, a series of working pens, and smaller structures she couldn't name at this distance. Above it all, the mountain rose enormous and indifferent, its upper reaches scarred with old avalanche chutes, its peaks catching the first threads of cloud from the northwest. The storm Ethan had mentioned building on schedule. She looked at it all. "It's a real operation," she said without meaning to say it aloud. "Yes," he said. She heard the quiet in that single word, the kind of quiet that comes from a person who has built something and learned not to speak of it too loudly in case the speaking somehow damages it. Cal Danner was sitting in a chair on the bunkhouse porch with his leg in a splint, and the expression of a man who had been sitting in chairs when he would rather not be. He was somewhere in his 50s, weathered in the way of men who had spent those years outdoors, and he watched them ride in with eyes that took in everything without making a show of it. "This her," he said when Ethan stopped the horse. "This is Miss Clara Bennett," Ethan said. "She'll be handling the records and correspondence for the season." Danner looked at Clara with the direct, uncomplicated appraisal of someone who had no patience for pretense. "Can you add figures?" he said. "Yes," she said. "You got handwriting a man can read?" "Better than that," she said. Something in his expression shifted fractionally toward approval. "Good," he said. "The correspondence from the Denver buyers is 4 months behind. There's a buyer named Holbrook who wrote 3 times about the fall contracts and nobody's answered him. He's probably taken his business elsewhere by now, and that's 200 head of beef worth of contract." He shot a look at Ethan that Clara recognized as long-standing and affectionate exasperation. Because some people can manage 10,000 acres of mountain terrain and cannot manage to answer a letter. Ethan took no apparent offense. "That's what she's here for," he said. Clara climbed down from the horse and looked at Danner. "Show me where the correspondence is," she said. "I'll start with Holbrook." Danner stared at her for a moment. Then he nodded once, the nod of a man who had expected to have to argue and found he didn't need to. "Office is through the main house," he said. "Second door on the left. There's a desk under enough paper to build a small barn." The office was small and practical, and looked exactly like a space that had been used heavily until April, and then abandoned when the man who used it could no longer walk to it. There were ledgers stacked on the desk, correspondence sorted into rough piles by someone who had given up sorting midway through, receipts tucked under a rock being used as a paperweight, and a cup of pencils whose points all needed sharpening. Clara stood in the middle of it for a moment. Then she set her satchel on the floor, moved the rock, sorted the correspondence into a new system in about 20 minutes, and sat down. She found Holbrook's 3 letters. They were polite in the first, impatient in the second, and something close to resigned in the third. He had not yet taken his business elsewhere. The third letter indicated he was willing to wait until mid-July, which was now but another week, without a response, and he would be gone. She found blank letterhead in the desk drawer, found an inkwell that hadn't dried out, found a pen, and wrote. She was on the second paragraph when the door opened and a young man stood in the doorway. One of the hands she guessed maybe 19 or 20, with a face still more boy than man, and a look of open curiosity. "Are you the schoolteacher?" he said. "I was," she said without looking up from the letter. "Currently, I'm a ranch clerk. Is there something you need?" "I heard in town." What you heard in town, Clara said, still writing, is what Thomas Carey wanted people to hear. If you'd like to make up your own mind about me, you're welcome to watch what I actually do over the next 3 months. She glanced up. "What's your name?" The young man blinked. "Pete Garland, ma'am." "Mr. Garland, does the Ridge need anything from me right now, or were you just curious?" He considered this with the honesty of someone too young to have learned to be subtle about it. "Curious mostly," he admitted. "Fair enough," she said. "Come back if you need something from the office." She looked back at the letter. She heard him go, and then she heard him say something outside that she couldn't make out. And then she heard a lower voice respond. "Ethan's," she thought. And then quiet. She finished the letter to Holbrook, addressed it, set it aside to be posted, and started on the ledger. By the time the storm came in at 3:30, rattling the windows and filling the mountain air with the smell of rain and ozone, Clara had answered 2 letters, caught a significant arithmetic error in the April cattle counts that had been propagating through 3 months of records, and was most of the way through reconciling the feed accounts. She heard footsteps in the hall, and then a knock on the open door. Ethan stood there. He had taken his hat off and was carrying it in one hand. There was rainwater on his shoulders from coming in from outside. "You finding your way around it?" he said, looking at the desk. "Someone made an error in April," she said. "The cattle count for the North pasture was written as 212 head. But when I cross-reference the grazing rotation records and the salt block deliveries, it should be 222. That 10-head discrepancy has been running through every subsequent calculation." He came into the room and looked at what she was pointing to. "The entry's in Danner's hand," he said. "People make errors," she said. "It doesn't look malicious, just a transposition. 212 instead of 222. Easy to do at the end of a long day." She looked up at him. "Do you want me to correct it forward through the records, or would you rather I document the discrepancy and leave the original entries intact for comparison?" He thought about this. Not a brief performative pause, but an actual moment of consideration. "Correct it forward," he said, "and note the correction date on each entry." "That's what I would have recommended," she said. He nodded. Then he looked at the pile of completed correspondence on the corner of the desk, much smaller pile now than it had been this morning. "You been at this all afternoon," he said. "There was a lot to do." "It's near 6, he said. "Cook'll have supper ready at the main house. You should eat." She looked up at him. The lamp on the desk had been lit at some point in the last hour, the light outside having faded under the storm clouds, and in the lamplight, his face looked different, less guarded maybe, or just familiar, in the way of someone you'd been working near all day, even if the work was separate. "Mr. Walker," she said, "am I eating with the hands?" "You'll eat where you're comfortable," he said. "Main house has a separate table in the kitchen where Danner and I usually take supper. You're welcome there if you want." She thought about it for only a second. "That would be fine," she said. She stood up, pressed the heel of her hand briefly against the small of her back hours at a strange desk, and the chair was the wrong height, and picked up the Holbrook letter. "This needs to go out with the Morning Post," she said. He took it, looked at the address, looked at the letter itself briefly. Something in his face changed, not dramatically, just a small adjustment in the set of his jaw. "This is good," he said. "It's a competent business letter," she said. "It tells Holbrook you're sorry for the delay, explains the foreman's injury, as the cause reaffirms your interest in the fall contract, and asks for his terms in writing so you can respond formally. It doesn't grovel, and it doesn't oversell. Men like Holbrook respect straightforward." Ethan looked at her. "How do you know what men like Holbrook respect?" he said. It was not challenging. It was genuinely curious. "I've been in a room with Thomas Carey," she said, "and about 15 other men like him in various capacities over the past 3 years. I've watched what works and what doesn't. She paused. Men who have built things from work respect other people who appear to be doing the same. Holbrook built his cattle brokerage from 4 head of cattle and alone in 1864. He doesn't want flattery. He wants to believe you're someone worth doing business with. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You looked him up," he said. "In your files," she said. "I found the original contract from 2 years ago. There was a brief correspondence history going back to 1877. It was enough." He turned the letter over once in his hands. Then he set it on the corner of the desk and said, "Supper's in 15 minutes," and walked out. She listened to his boots on the floor. Then she turned back to the accounts and wrote for another 8 minutes before stopping, which took the total to closer to 20. But she had a feeling Ethan Walker was the kind of man who waited. The kitchen of the main house was large and plain and smelled of wood smoke and something with onions. Danner was already there, his splinted leg extended under the table, a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked at Clara when she came in and nodded once. The cook was a short, broad man named Amos, who had been feeding cattle crews in the mountain operations for longer than he would specify, and who treated everyone with the same unvarying cheerfulness that Clara suspected was either profound contentment or a survival strategy, and she was not sure which. Ethan was washing his hands at the basin when she came in. He dried them and sat down without ceremony. They ate. Stew with biscuits, the biscuits made better than she would have expected. Danner asked Clara specific questions about what she'd found in the records. Real questions, operational questions about the discrepancy and the correspondence and the feed accounts. And she answered them directly, and he nodded and occasionally made a sound of the kind that meant he was recalibrating an opinion. "The Holbrook letter," he said. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth," she said. "That the injury delayed correspondence, that the operation was continuing normally, and that we valued the business relationship. I asked for his terms in writing." Danner looked at Ethan. "Should have done that in May," he said. "I know," Ethan said. "Could have done it myself from the chair." "I know that too." Danner looked back at Clara. "He's stubborn about asking for help," he said with the candor of a man who had worked with someone long enough to have run out of tact about certain things. "I gathered," she said. "You might as well know it now." He broke a biscuit in half. "He also won't complain when he's hurt, won't stop working in weather that would keep sensible men inside, and has a particular blind spot about people he decides to trust, which is either admirable or going to get him killed eventually." Ethan ate his stew without looking up. Clara looked at Danner. "Are you warning me," she said, "or describing him?" "Both," Danner said. "Seems useful for you to know the situation." "I appreciate the context," she said. Danner nodded. "Good enough then." Outside, the storm continued its work against the windows. The thunder was moving east now, the worst of it past, but the rain was steady, and the mountain at their backs gave it a particular quality, immense and patient and close. Clara ate her supper and listened to the rain, and for the first time in a week, something in her chest that had been wound very tight began very slightly to ease. Not resolved. Not finished. Not safe. She was under no illusions that 3 months at altitude would solve the problem of Thomas Carey, or the school board, or the life she had built in Harlow, any of which could still be destroyed. But for the first time since the nail had been driven into her door, she was sitting at a table where the conversation was honest and the work was real, and someone had not asked her to apologize for existing. It was not nothing. It was, she thought, the beginning of something she could not yet name. After supper, while Danner and Ethan talked over the next week's cattle rotation, Clara excused herself and went back to the office. She lit the lamp again and opened the ledger. She worked until the storm passed, and the night turned quiet, and the mountain air came in through the crack in the window, and she thought about 9 miles of hot road she hadn't had to walk, and a man who had ridden down from a mountain because he couldn't just ride past, and what it might mean to be in a place where the truth had at least a chance of mattering. The accounts were not going to fix themselves. Neither, possibly, was anything else. But Clara Bennett had never waited for fixing to come from outside herself, and she was not going to start tonight. She sharpened a pencil, turned to a fresh page, and kept working. The morning after the storm, Clara found a note on the office desk. It was written in a hand she did not recognize, large angular letters pressed hard into the paper, the kind of writing that came from a man who rarely wrote and treated it as manual labor. Writer coming up from Harlow today. Thomas Carey's man. Don't come out of the office until I tell you it's clear. E.W. She read it twice. Then she set it face down on the desk, opened the ledger, and started working. She heard the writer come in about an hour later. She heard voices. Ethan's low and unhurried, and another voice she didn't know, pitched higher, and with the particular tone of someone delivering a message they have been rehearsed in. She couldn't make out words through the wall, but she could make out the shape of the conversation. It had the rhythm of a warning dressed up as courtesy. She kept her pen moving. The conversation outside lasted 11 minutes. She counted them by the pendulum clock on the office wall. The one that had been ticking in this room for however many years this operation had been standing. Then she heard a horse leave at a trot, heading downhill. Then she heard nothing for a while. Then Ethan knocked on the office door and came in. He had his hat in his hand again. She was beginning to understand that he always carried his hat when he was working through something. What did he want? She said without looking up. Official inquiry, he said. From the school board. Carey wants documentation that you're residing here in an appropriate capacity. Formal letter of employment signed and witnessed. She set her pen down and looked at him. He's trying to find another charge, she said. Yes. If he can establish that I'm living on a single man's property without a formal employment record, he can use it. That's what I figured. She folded her hands on the desk. Do we have a formal employment record? We will, he said, by this afternoon. He set a piece of paper on the desk. Danner drafted it this morning. He used to do contracts for a cattle company in Texas before he came up here. It's legal, and it's witnessed he and Amos both signed. I need your signature. She looked at the document. It was straightforward and precise, salary duties term of employment residence accommodation. The kind of document that left nothing for interpretation. She signed it. Good, Ethan said. Carey won't stop there, she said. No. One document won't satisfy him. He'll push on something else. Probably. He took the signed paper. But each time he pushes and finds nothing, it costs him something. Men like Carey depend on the other side having nothing to push back with. That's changing. She looked at him directly. You're not just giving me work, she said. You're building a record. A visible, documented, legitimate record of employment, so that anything he says about me has a formal counter. He met her eyes. Does that bother you? She thought about it honestly. No, she said. It's intelligent, and it's more than anyone else has done. She paused. But I want to understand what I'm walking into. He's not going to let this go, is he? Thomas Carey, Ethan said, has never in his adult life let anything go that he decided he wanted. What he wants is the creek water rights that run through my north grazing land. To get them, he needs me cooperative or gone. To get me cooperative, he needs leverage. You were leverage away to make me look like I was harboring trouble. He turned his hat once in his hands. He miscalculated. How? He thought I'd send you away to avoid the association, he said. He doesn't understand that I don't make decisions the way he makes decisions. She studied his face. How do you make decisions? Slowly, he said. And then completely. He took the document and left. She picked her pen back up. Her hand, she noticed, was perfectly steady. She found that interesting. Pete Garland appeared in the office doorway at mid-morning with a look on his face that was trying to be casual and failing. Miss Bennett, he said. Mr. Garland. There's a thing I maybe should have told you yesterday. He came in and stood with his hat pressed between his hands in an unconscious echo of his employer. When I was in Harlow last week for the supply run, I heard things. She set her pen down. What kind of things? About you. He looked uncomfortable. About why you were let go. The story going around. He stopped. Tell me, she said. I'd rather know what's being said than not know. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. They're saying you helped yourself to school funds. Money that was supposed to be for books and supplies. That you kept it. Clara was quiet for 4 full seconds. That's new, she said. Ma'am, the original accusation was improper conduct, she said. Then it was dishonesty about examination results. Now it's theft of school funds. She looked at Pete steadily. Every time there's nothing to find on the last charge, there's a new one. Do you understand what that pattern means? Pete thought about it with the earnest effort of someone who actually wanted to understand. That he's making it up as he goes, he said. That he's looking for something that will stick, she said. Which means nothing so far has. She paused. Is there anything else? They're saying you came up here because the boss... He stopped again, more uncomfortable now. Because Mr. Walker and I have an inappropriate arrangement, she said flatly. Yes, ma'am. And what do you think? He blinked. He clearly had not expected to be asked. I think, he said slowly, that you were in the office until late last night fixing records that nobody's touched in months. And you caught an error Danner didn't catch, and Danner's been doing cattle accounting for 20 years. He paused. Doesn't seem like someone who came up here for anything other than work. No, she said. It doesn't. She picked her pen back up. Thank you for telling me, Mr. Garland. It was honest of you. He nodded and left. She stared at the ledger for a moment without writing. Theft of school funds. That was escalation. That was Carrie deciding that social censure wasn't enough and reaching for something with legal teeth. She needed to think about what records existed, what documentation she had retained, what could be verified. She started a separate sheet of paper and began writing down everything she could remember about the school's finances for the past 3 years. Every expenditure, every purchase, the names of suppliers, the dates of board meetings where accounts had been reviewed. She wrote it all down in precise, clear sequence, every detail she could pull from memory, because memory documented in ink was better than memory that existed only in her head. She wrote for 2 hours without stopping. Shaw. It was Danner who found her still at it when he swung in on his crutch for the midday check. You're supposed to be on the accounts, he said, looking at the separate pages. I am, she said. These are my own accounts, from Harlow. She looked up. Carrie's people are now claiming I stole school funds. Danner's expression did not change dramatically, but something in the set of his mouth sharpened. He's escalating. Yes. How much do you remember? Everything, she said. I kept my own records in parallel with the official ones, a habit from the first year when I realized the board's record-keeping was not reliable. I don't have the physical documents, they're in the schoolhouse, but I have the figures in my head, and I can reconstruct the timeline. Danner lowered himself into the chair across the desk. He looked at what she'd written. This is admissible, he said. In a legal sense, as corroborating testimony, yes. If there's any proceeding, I can produce this. The burden of proof is on whoever makes the accusation. Right now, Carrie has the accusation and nothing behind it. She met Danner's eyes. But I need the original school records, the physical ledger, the purchase receipts. They're still in the schoolhouse in Harlow. Danner was quiet for a moment. Someone would have to go get them, he said. Yes. Without tipping Carrie off. Yes. He tapped one finger on the desk. I might know someone in town, he said. Not connected to Carrie. Not in his pocket. Who? Reverend Aldous, he said. He married Ethan's parents 40 years ago. He's about 72 now, and the only man in Harlow County that Thomas Carey is actually careful around because the Reverend has a long memory and a loud Sunday voice. He paused. He was at the town meeting. He was one of the ones who didn't say anything. But the fact that he didn't say anything is different from the fact that you didn't have support. Aldous chooses his moments. Clara looked at him carefully. Do you think he would help? I think, Danner said, that if Ethan wrote to him and explained the situation, the Reverend would find a reason to visit the schoolhouse to collect any personal belongings that might have been left behind. And I think he would consider a ledger a personal belonging if someone explained to him that it mattered. Clara said nothing for a moment. Why are you helping me? She asked. Not accusing, genuinely asking. Danner looked at her with the direct, uncomplicated gaze she was coming to recognize as his primary mode of communication. "Because I've worked for Ethan Walker for 9 years," he said. "And in 9 years, I have seen him do exactly 2 things that surprised me. One was when he refused Carrie's offer for the water rights, because the offer was generous enough that most men would have taken it. And the other was yesterday when he rode down into town to offer you work." He paused. "Ethan Walker doesn't do things without thinking them through. If he decided you were worth the trouble, that's information." Clara felt something tighten in her throat that she refused to let turn into anything visible. "I appreciate that," she said carefully. "Don't mention it," Danner said. "Write down exactly what you need from that schoolhouse. I'll get a letter to Ethan tonight." She didn't see Ethan until late afternoon, when he came in from the north pasture with mud on his boots and the look of a man who had been making decisions in the field all day. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her sitting at the table with the pages she'd written. "Danner told me about the new accusation," he said. "Yes." He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. He was still in his work clothes, hadn't cleaned up yet, and there was a long scratch on the back of his left hand from something. He looked at it briefly and then at her. "What do you need?" he said. It was such a clean, uncomplicated question that it took her a moment to answer it. "The school ledger," she said, "and the purchase receipt files for the past 3 years. They're in the desk in the schoolhouse office. If Carrie gets there first and removes them, I have nothing physical to counter with." "Aldous," he said. Danner mentioned him. "I'll write tonight." He looked at the pages in front of her. "Is that the reconstruction? From memory. 3 years of accounts. Every expenditure I can document from recollection." He picked up one of the pages and read it. Not quickly, actually reading it, following the figures and the dates and the supplier names. She watched his face as he read. It was not an expressive face, but she was beginning to learn its small adjustments. "This is meticulous," he said. "I'm a teacher," she said. "Or I was. Record-keeping is not optional when you're accountable to a board that would use any error against you." He set the page down. "Did you ever think they would go this far?" he said. "When it started, did you know it would get to this?" She looked at the table for a moment. "I knew it would get bad," she said. "When Thomas Carey came to me the second time, he asked me to pass his son, and I refused again. I saw something in his face. He wasn't angry exactly. He was calculating. A man who gets angry is working with emotion. A man who calculates is working with a plan." She looked up. "I knew whatever came next would be deliberate and thorough. I didn't know the specifics, but I knew the nature of it. And you stayed," he said, "after you knew." "For 6 weeks after that conversation," she said. "Yes, because the children needed to finish the school year, because leaving would have looked like guilt, and because—" She stopped. "Because," he said. She looked at him directly. "Because I am not in the habit of being moved by men who think they can move me," she said. "And I wasn't going to start with Thomas Carey." The kitchen was quiet. Amos was clattering somewhere in the back of the house. Outside, the hands were finishing up the day's work, and she could hear Pete Garland's voice in the distance, saying something to someone that made them laugh. Ethan was looking at her with the particular quality of attention she had noticed the first time he'd spoken to her on the road. Not intrusive, not aggressive, just fully present. As if she were a thing worth attending to. "Write down the specific location of the ledger and the receipts," he said. "Which desk, which drawer. Aldous will need to be exact if he's going to retrieve them without Carrie's people noticing. They have people watching the schoolhouse. Carey won't leave the records unattended after he makes the accusation," he said. "He's not careless. The building will be watched within a day or 2. She picked up her pen immediately. "Top drawer left side of the oak desk in the schoolhouse office," she said, writing as she spoke. "The ledger has a green cover and my name written on the inside front page. The receipts are in a brown envelope marked Expenditures with the year. There are 3 envelopes, one for each year." She looked up. "There's also a letter, in the same drawer, from the board chairman to me dated February of this year. In it he asks me, not tells me, asks me to modify the examination results for the Carey boy. In writing. He was careless enough to put it in writing. Ethan went very still. "You have a letter," he said, "from the board chairman asking you to falsify records." "I kept it because I knew I would need it," she said. "It's the same envelope, behind the receipts." Something moved across his face. Not triumph, but the expression of a man who has been playing a careful game and has just discovered an unexpected resource. "That letter," he said quietly, "changes the entire case." "Yes," she said, "it does." "If Carrie knows you have it, he may not know I kept it," she said. "It was a verbal request first. The written version came later, I think, because he wanted a record of asking through official channels before he moved to other methods. He may have assumed I would treat it as routine correspondence and not preserve it separately." "But you did." "I did." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you been carrying that around, knowing what it meant?" She looked at him steadily. "Since February," she said. 5 months. He absorbed that. The full weight of it. 5 months of teaching school, with that letter in a drawer, knowing what was coming, knowing she had the counter and could not play it without triggering the exact attack she was trying to survive. "You played it right," he said, waiting. "I played it the only way I could," she said, "which was to do nothing that could be used against me and document everything." She paused. "The mistake I made was underestimating how much damage he could do with fabrication alone without needing any real basis." "That's not a mistake," he said. "That's an honest miscalculation about how far a man was willing to go. There's a difference." She felt something shift in her chest again, that same slight easing she had noticed at supper the night before, but sharper this time. The particular sensation of being seen accurately, not charitably accurately. It was rarer than people understood. "Send the letter to Aldous tonight," she said. "Tell him about the letter specifically. Tell him to be careful." "I will." He stood up. "Eat something. You've been at this for hours." She almost said something dismissive, but she was actually hungry, and the dismissal would have been a reflex rather than a real response. And she was trying not to be a person who operated on reflexes when she didn't have to. "All right," she said. He looked mildly surprised that she agreed without argument. She filed that away too. That night after supper, after Danner had gone to bed, and Amos had cleaned the kitchen and gone to his own quarters, Clara sat at the table with a cup of tea that was going cold and heard Ethan in the office writing. The scratch of a pen. A pause. The scratch again. She got up and knocked on the open door. Howe was at the desk. Her desk now during working hours, with 3 sheets of paper in front of him and a pen in his hand, and the specific expression of a man who knows what he wants to say and is negotiating with the language. "Do you want help with the letter?" she said. He looked up. For a moment she thought he would say no. "Yes," he said. She came in and sat in the chair across the desk, the one Danner used, and looked at what he had written. It was direct and clear, and said what it needed to say, but it lacked a particular quality of she searched for the right word of personal appeal. Aldous was 72 years old and had married Ethan's parents and would act from loyalty and conscience, and the letter needed to reach both of those things. "May I?" she said. He handed her the pen. She rewrote the central paragraph. She kept his words where they worked and changed what didn't, and she added one sentence at the end that she thought would matter to a man of Aldous' particular history in this county. When she handed it back, he read it and was quiet. "That sentence at the end," he said. "About your mother," she said. "Yes. Is it presumptuous?" He read it again. "She was the first person in this valley to speak kindly to a stranger, and you performed that ceremony, and I believe you remember it." He looked up. "She was," he said, "and he does." "Then leave it," Clara said. He folded the letter. They sat in the small office with the lamp between them and the mountain dark outside the window, and for a moment neither of them said anything. It was not uncomfortable. It was the particular quiet of 2 people who have been doing serious work together all day and do not need to perform anything for each other at the end of it. "Why did you become a teacher?" he said. The question surprised her. Not its content, but its timing. The fact that he asked it now in this moment after a day of legal strategy and reconstruction of financial records. Because I was good at it, she said. And because the children in rural counties don't have enough of it. And because... She paused. My father could read and my mother couldn't, and I watched what that difference meant in their lives. Which one could read a contract? Which one had to trust the other to read it for her? She looked at her hands. I thought if I could spend 20 or 30 years making sure children in places like Harlow could read and cipher, that would be a life worth the spending. I was looking at her with that quality of full attention. And Carrie took that from you, he said. He took the position, she said. He hasn't taken what I know, or who I am, or what I can do. She met his gaze. Those aren't things you can pull off a desk and file an accusation against. He held her gaze for a long moment. No, he said. They're not. He stood and picked up the letter. I'll have this with the morning writer, he said. Good night, Mr. Walker. He stopped at the door. Something in the set of his shoulders shifted fractionally. Ethan, he said. Up here people use names. She considered that for a moment. Good night, Ethan, she said. He nodded once and left. She sat alone in the office for a little while longer. The lamp threw its small circle of light over the desk and the ledger and the pages of her reconstruction, and outside the mountain was enormous and still and indifferent to everything except its own ancient processes. And she thought about the letter in a schoolhouse drawer, and a reverend with a long memory, and a man who wrote slowly and then completely. She thought about 5 months of waiting. She thought about how it felt to stop waiting. She picked up the pen and added 3 more pages to the reconstruction before she finally went to bed. The next 4 days had a rhythm to them. She was at the desk by sunup. The accounts first, the immediate operational work, the correspondence that needed answering, the feed calculations, and the grazing rotation records, and the buyer communications that had been accumulating since April. She was fast. She had always been fast with figures, and 3 years of running a school on a thin budget had refined that speed to something close to instinct. By mid-morning, she had usually cleared the day's operational work and moved to the reconstruction, her parallel record of the Harlow school finances, building it out day by day, consulting her own memory, the way other people consulted ledgers. Pete Garland brought her coffee at the same time every morning without being asked after the second day. She did not comment on this. He did not explain it. It was simply a thing that happened. Danner came in twice a day, once at mid-morning to check on operational matters, and once in the afternoon to discuss anything that had come up. He was blunt and knowledgeable, and had no patience for anything he considered imprecision, which suited her fine. Ethan she saw at meals, and occasionally in passing during the day, when work brought him through the main house. He did not linger. He did not make conversation for the sake of making conversation. But she noticed she was a teacher. She had spent years noticing that he was aware of what was happening in the office. He would make one comment at supper that would tell her he had looked at the correspondence pile and registered its reduction, or noted that the grazing records were current in a way they hadn't been in months. I didn't say more than that. But he noticed. On the 4th morning, a rider came up from Harlow. Not Carrie's man this time. A younger man she didn't recognize, trail dusty and in a hurry, who asked for Ethan Walker and was directed to the north pasture and came back 20 minutes later with Ethan beside him. Clara watched from the office window as they talked in the yard. She couldn't hear anything, but she could see Ethan's face, and she saw the moment when whatever the rider said landed. His expression didn't change much, but his jaw set in a way she hadn't seen before. When the rider left and Ethan came inside, he came straight to the office. Reverend Aldous went to the schoolhouse yesterday morning, he said. And, she said. The desk was empty, he said. The drawer had been forced. The ledger is gone. The receipts are gone. She felt the bottom drop out of something in her chest. The letter, she said. Gone, he said. The silence in the office was absolute for 3 full seconds. He got there first, she said. Her voice was level. She was very proud of how level it was. Sometime in the past 2 days, Ethan said. Aldous says the lock on the schoolhouse was changed yesterday morning. New padlock on the door. Carrie's people are calling it a security measure to protect school property. She looked at the wall across from the desk. "He has the letter now," she said. "The letter where his own board chairman asked me to falsify records." "Yes." "That letter is evidence of wrongdoing on their part," she said. "Which means they'll destroy it." "Probably." She looked at him. "He moved fast," she said. "Faster than I thought he would. Which means he knew or someone told him that I had retained that correspondence." Ethan was quiet. "Someone in this house," she said, not accusing, working through it. "Or someone who saw me leave Harlow and understood what I would know to preserve." "Or someone who was watching the mail," Ethan said. "The writer I sent to Aldous went through town." She closed her eyes briefly. "The letter. Carrie could have had the writer's correspondence read." "It's possible." His voice was very even. "I should have thought of that." "So should I," she said. "Neither of us did. That's done." She opened her eyes. "What do we have left?" He looked at her. "We have your reconstruction," he said. "And we have Aldous, who is willing to testify to what he found or didn't find. And we have Danner, who knows Carrie's history in this county going back 12 years. He paused. "And we have the pattern." "The pattern," she said. "Every charge they've made so far has a sequence," he said. "Improper conduct, then dishonesty about records, then theft of school funds, each one appearing right after the last one fails to hold." He met her eyes. "A judge who's paying attention will see that pattern. A man who builds charges that way is not a man who found evidence. He's a man who's looking for a charge that will work." She stared at him. "You're thinking about a judge," she said. "You're thinking about taking this to a court." "I'm thinking about the land office," he said. "The water rights dispute has been in informal negotiation for 4 years. If I file formally, if I put this in front of the territorial court as a land and water dispute, with documented evidence of intimidation of witnesses connected to the case, it changes the nature of it." He paused. "You become a witness in a federal land proceeding. That gives you protections that a dismissed schoolteacher doesn't have." Clara said nothing for a long moment. "You've been thinking about this since before I arrived," she said. He didn't deny it. "You didn't just offer me work," she said slowly. "You were already planning to take Carrie to the territorial court over the water rights. And you saw that what he did to me was the same pattern. Intimidation, fabricated accusations, using the local power structure to move people out of his way. And you thought that it was the same case," he said quietly. "Yes." She felt something complicated move through her. Not betrayal. It wasn't betrayal. He had told her the truth about everything he'd said. He hadn't lied. But he had known more than he'd offered, and she found that she needed a moment to recalibrate. "Why didn't you tell me this on the road?" she said. "Because on the road you didn't know me," he said. "And I was asking you to trust me enough to come up here. Telling you I was planning to involve you in a territorial land dispute would have been asking for more trust than I'd earned." She thought about that with the scrupulous honesty she tried to apply to everything. "That's fair," she said. "Clara." It was the first time he had used her given name. She noticed it and didn't show it. "I should have told you sooner. That's on me." "Yes," she said. "It is." She looked at him. "But you're telling me now. And what you're describing is the only real path out of this that doesn't end with me living under Carrie's version of my story for the rest of my life." She paused. "So tell me everything. What does filing formally with the territorial court require? What do we need? Who do we need? And how long do we have before Carrie's next move?" Ethan pulled a chair out from the corner and sat down. "Let's start at the beginning," he said. And he did. The territorial court filing took 3 days to prepare. Clara worked on it the way she worked on everything methodically, completely, without leaving gaps that a sharp opposing lawyer could push through. Ethan sat with her the first night for 4 hours, going over every piece of documentation. They had every gap they needed to account for every point where Carrie's people could attack the filing and find nothing to hold. Danner contributed 12 years of witnessed history. He had a memory like a land survey, precise, detailed, and entirely uninterested in sentiment. He dictated and Clara wrote, and by the end of the second night, they had a 40-page document that laid out the water rights dispute, the pattern of intimidation, the sequence of accusations against Clara, and the connection between the two. "This is good," Danner said, reading the final version. "This is better than good." "Will it hold?" Clara said. "In front of the right judge, it'll do more than hold." He looked at Ethan. "You know who we need." "Hargrove," Ethan said. "Judge Hargrove's circuit doesn't run through Harlow County," Clara said. "No," Ethan said. "But this isn't a Harlow County matter anymore. Water rights disputes that cross county lines go to the territorial court in Cheyenne. Hargrove sits that bench in September." "September is 2 months away," she said. "Yes," he said. "Which means we have 2 months, and Carrie has 2 months, and the question is what he does with his." She looked at the filing on the desk between them. "He'll move before September," she said. "He knows we're building something. He took the records, which means he's paying attention. He'll try to collapse this before it gets to Cheyenne." "Yes," Ethan said. "He will." They looked at each other across the desk, and neither of them said the obvious thing, which was that they didn't know exactly how Carrie would move, only that he would, and that the next weeks would determine everything. "Send the filing," she said. "Tonight." Ethan picked it up and left the office. Clara sat alone at the desk and listened to the mountain night, and she thought about Thomas Carey in his office in Harlow with a ledger that wasn't his, and a letter that could destroy him. And she thought about what a man like that did when he felt a case closing around him. She thought he got dangerous. She was right. It started 6 days later, and it didn't start with Carrie. It started with water. The creek that ran through Ethan's north grazing land came down off the ridge through a series of natural channels that had been there as long as the mountain had been there. In July, it ran full and cold from the snowmelt, and the cattle needed it, and the summer operation depended on it, in the way everything in mountain country depended on water, absolutely without substitute. Pete Garland found the diversion on a Tuesday morning. He came back to the main house at a dead run, which was something Clara had not seen him do, and he hit the porch boards hard and shouted for Ethan before he was through the door. Clara heard it from the office. She was on her feet before she heard Ethan's voice from upstairs. She came out into the hallway and heard Pete talking fast, the words tumbling. "North channel's been blocked," Pete said. "Something built up overnight rocks timber looks deliberate. The water's running east into Carrie's land instead of down to the north pasture. I found 2 of the steers already in distress." Ethan was past Pete before he finished speaking, moving through the house with the focused speed of a man who understood immediately what this meant. Clara stepped back against the wall as he went by, and he stopped for just a half second and looked at her. "Stay here," he said. "Go," she said. He was out the door. She stood in the hallway for approximately 4 seconds. Then she went back to the office, sat down, and started writing. She wrote everything Pete had said word for word with the time and the date. Then she went to the window and wrote what she could observe, how many men rode out which direction, how long it took. She documented it all with the precision of a person who understood that what happened in the next hours needed a clear record, and that someone had to be the one to keep it. Danner appeared in the doorway on his crutch, his face already calculating. "You heard," he said. "I heard," she said, still writing. "Deliberate diversion of a natural watercourse onto an adjacent property. That's not just trespass, that's interference with an established water right." "Can you document the legal basis?" he said. "Already doing it." She looked up. "How long has that creek been running through the north pasture?" "Since before Ethan bought the land," Danner said. "Prior appropriation doctrine, first use establishes right. That water right predates Carrie's claims by at least 15 years. Do you have the original land purchase documentation, the deed?" "Filing cabinet in the back room," he said. "Second drawer." She was around the desk and past him before he finished the sentence. She found the deed in 7 minutes and had it open on the desk in 8. She read the water rights language in the original conveyance. It was there, clearly described with a date of establishment, going back to 1861. Carrie's own first land acquisition in the county was 1869. She wrote that down too. Then she sat back and thought about what a man with a diverted creek and 8 head of cattle in distress was going to do, and what a man who had diverted the creek was hoping he would do, and she felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Carrie wanted Ethan angry. He wanted a confrontation. He wanted something physical and visible that he could document and use trespassing on Carrie's land to restore the diversion, or worse. She got up and went to find Pete Garland. He was in the yard, still catching his breath. "Mr. Garland," she said, "when you found the diversion, was anyone around? Anyone from Carrie's property?" Pete looked at her. "There were 2 men on the ridge above," he said, "watching. I didn't recognize them. I figured they were hands from the Carrie spread. Witnesses," she said. "He put witnesses there. He built the diversion, and then he put men on the ridge to watch what Ethan would do when he found it." Pete's face changed. "He wants a fight," he said. "He wants Ethan to cross onto his land and confront his people," she said, "which gives him an assault claim or a trespass claim to file before our water rights case gets to Cheyenne." She looked at Pete steadily. "Who went with Ethan?" "3 of the hands," he said. "Jim, Hector, and Tom." "Go after them," she said. "Tell Ethan what I just told you. Tell him the men on the ridge are witnesses and that Carrie wants a confrontation. Tell him exactly that." She gripped Pete's arm briefly. "Fast, Mr. Garland." "I was on a horse inside 2 minutes." She went back inside and kept writing. Ethan came back 2 hours later. He came back controlled, which she had not been entirely certain he would. She heard him in the yard talking to his men, and she heard the particular flatness in his voice that she had come to understand meant he was keeping something very tightly in check. He came into the office and stood in the doorway. "We cleared the diversion," he said, "restored the flow, didn't cross onto Carrie's land, didn't engage with his men on the ridge." A pause. "Pete got to me in time." "How are the cattle?" she said. "The 2 that were distressed will recover. Another hour and we'd have lost them." His jaw was set. He timed it. Built the diversion at night, waited for morning, had his witnesses in place before we'd have found it. "Yes," she said. "This is going to keep happening," he said. "Every time we make progress on the filing, he'll hit something on the operation. He's not trying to win in court. He's trying to make the operation unmanageable before we get to court." "I know," she said. "So we need to move the timeline." He looked at her. "The September date for Hargrove Circuit," she said. "Is there a way to file for an emergency injunction to get the water rights question before a judge before September on the basis of ongoing documented interference?" I was quiet for a moment. "You'd need an attorney," he said. "A good one, not from Harlow County." "Cheyenne," she said. "There's a man named Graves," Danner said from the hallway. He had been listening apparently for some time. "Arthur Graves. He handled the Morrison land case in '81. Beat a claim twice as well funded as Carrie's." He paused. "He's expensive." "How expensive?" Ethan said. Danner named a figure. Ethan didn't blink. "Write him," he said. "I'll have the letter ready by tonight," Clara said. "Add today's incident to the filing," he said. "Full documentation. Time description, the witnesses Carrie placed the cattle affected the restoration we carried out, and the fact that we did not cross the property line." "Already done," she said. He looked at the papers on the desk. He looked at her. "You had this ready before I came back," he said. "I had time," she said. Something moved in his face. Not surprise exactly. Something that was past surprise. Something that had been recalibrating steadily for the past week and had arrived at a new position that he hadn't yet named. He turned and went back out to his operation. The letter to Arthur Graves in Cheyenne went out the next morning, carried by Ethan himself on a fast horse to the nearest reliable postal depot rather than through the Harlow post office, where Carrie's reach was too long. 3 days passed. The nights had changed. Not dramatically. The mountain dark was still the mountain dark, and the work was still the work. But there was something different in the hours after supper. Danner went to bed early because his leg ached by evening, and Amos cleaned the kitchen and disappeared to his quarters. And Clara and Ethan were often the last 2 people in the main house. They didn't plan it. It happened the way things happen when 2 people are doing serious work in proximity. The conversation that started about the filing extended past the filing, and then past the day's events, and then past operational matters entirely. One night she told him about her father. Not much. She wasn't a woman who gave herself away in large pieces, but something. That he had been a schoolteacher himself in Ohio before the family moved west. That he had taught her to read at 4 years old by the method of refusing to treat it as anything other than a natural thing a person did the way they breathed. I used to say that the difference between a free person and an unfree one was whether they could read their own contracts, she said. Smart man, Ethan said. He died of fever when I was 17, she said. By then he'd taught me everything he knew about teaching, so it seemed like the obvious thing to do with it. Ethan turned his coffee cup once in his hands. My father taught me to read land, he said. Weather, grass, how to know from looking at a slope whether it would hold cattle through August. He paused. He said the mountain would always tell you what it was going to do if you paid attention. Do you believe that? She said. Mostly, he said. Men are harder to read. She smiled at that, a real one, small but genuine, the kind she hadn't produced in a while. He saw it. She knew he saw it because something in his face responded to it in the way a face responds when it sees something it didn't expect. Neither of them said anything about it, but she noticed. And he knew she noticed. The response from Arthur Graves arrived on a Thursday 12 days after Ethan's letter went out. It was 2 pages long, dense with legal language, and the short version was this. Graves had reviewed the documentation they had sent. He believed the case was strong. He could file for an emergency injunction on the basis of documented ongoing interference with established water rights, and he could be in Harlow County by the 15th if they required it. The second page was his fee schedule. It was exactly what Danner had said it would be. Ethan signed the retainer agreement that same day. And that same afternoon, without any of them connecting it to the arrival of Graves's letter. Though Clara connected it immediately, in retrospect, everything changed. The writer who came up from Harlow at 2 in the afternoon was not one of Carrie's men, and was not a stranger. It was Reverend Aldous himself, 72 years old, and moving on horseback, with the careful determination of a man who had decided something and intended to act on it before he reconsidered. Ethan brought him into the kitchen, and Clara came from the office and stopped when she saw who it was. Aldous was a small man with white hair and eyes that were very dark and very sharp, and he looked at Clara the way he might look at a passage of scripture. He was trying to understand correctly before preaching it. Miss Bennett, he said. Reverend Aldous, she said. Sit down, please, he said, to both of them, as if it were his house. They sat. He sat across from them and folded his hands on the table and said, I should have spoken at the meeting. The room was quiet. You should have, Clara said. He accepted that without flinching. I know what I know about Thomas Carey, he said. I have known it for 20 years, and I told myself that speaking without proof would do more harm than good, and that was partly true, and partly a very sophisticated version of cowardice. He looked at her directly. I am sorry for it. Clara held his gaze. What changed? She said. Margaret Hollis came to me yesterday, he said. She's the board chairman's wife. He paused. She's also a woman who has been carrying something for 6 months and has run out of room for it. Clara went very still. She knows something, she said. She was present, Aldous said, when her husband wrote the letter asking you to modify the examination results. She heard the conversation. She saw the letter drafted. And when the ledger and the records were removed from the schoolhouse, her husband told her the letter had been destroyed. He looked at the table for a moment. She did not agree with that decision. She can testify, Clara said, to the existence of the letter, to the content of the conversation. Yes, Aldous said, if she's protected from retaliation, which is the condition she named. Ethan spoke for the first time since they sat down. What kind of protection does she need? Her husband is in Carrie's debt, Aldous said. Financially. The mortgage on their property runs through Carrie's investment operation. If she testifies against the board's decision, Carrie will call the note. He met Ethan's eyes. She needs to know that won't destroy her family. Silence. Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at Ethan. What's the note worth? Ethan said. Aldous told him. It was a significant figure. Not insurmountable for a man running 3,000 acres of productive summer grazing, but significant. The kind of figure a man thought about before committing to it. Ethan thought about it for approximately 15 seconds. "I'll buy the note," he said. "From Carrie's investment operation. It's a legitimate financial instrument. He can't refuse a reasonable offer without cause. I'll hold it at the current terms and give Margaret Hollis's husband a written agreement that I have no intention of calling it early." He paused. "In exchange for her testimony." Clara stared at him. "Ethan," she said. "It's a land case," he said. "The water rights question is worth more than the note. If Graves gets the injunction and we win in Cheyenne, Carrie's attempt to take the creek will cost him far more than what I'm spending on the note." He said it practically without drama, but she heard something under the practicality that was not entirely practical. Aldous was watching them both. His sharp dark eyes moved between them once and then settled. "I'll go back to Margaret tonight," he said. "I believe she'll agree." "Tell her she has my word," Ethan said. "In writing if she needs it." Aldous stood. He looked at Clara again, that same careful, calibrating look. "Miss Bennett," he said, "I have been in this valley for 40 years. I've watched Thomas Carey build what he has by finding the weakest point in whatever stood in his way and pressing there until it gave." He paused. "I don't believe he has found your weakest point yet, and I suspect he's beginning to understand that." He nodded to Ethan, put his hat on, and let himself out. The kitchen was very quiet. Clara looked at the table. She felt something enormous trying to happen in her chest and was managing it with everything she had. "You didn't have to offer the note," she said. "I know," he said. She stopped. "That's a significant amount of money, Ethan. For someone you've known 3 weeks. 13 days, he said. She looked at him. "I know exactly how long," he said. It was very quiet. It was not a declaration of anything. He was not that kind of man, and they were not in that kind of moment, and both of them understood that. But it was something. A small, precise, deliberate something. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she looked at the table. "Margaret Hollis will agree," she said. "She's been holding that for 6 months. She'll agree." "Yes," he said. "And Graves files for the injunction. Next week if we move fast." "We'll move fast," she said. He nodded and got up to send a message to Graves. She sat at the table alone for a moment and pressed her hand flat against the wood and breathed. 13 days. Carrie moved the night before Graves was due to arrive. Clara woke to the sound of shouting and was out of bed and at the window before she was fully conscious. She saw light orange light, the wrong color, coming from the direction of the north barn. Fire. She was dressed in 40 seconds and in the hallway in 45, and Ethan was already past her, moving at a dead run for the door. She ran after him. The north barn was burning. Not the whole structure, not yet, but the east wall had caught, and the hay stored against it was going fast, and the horses inside were screaming in a way that was nothing like any other sound an animal made. Pure terror, and the hands were running from the bunkhouse, and Pete Garland was already at the barn door trying to get it open. She ran to Pete. "Get back," he said. "I'm not leaving," she said. "What do you need?" He looked at her for 1 second, assessing, not dismissing, and said, "Water line from the well. The pump handle's stiff. You're going to have to work it hard." She went to the pump and worked it. It was not graceful work. The handle was iron and heavy, and the resistance was real, and her arms were not arms accustomed to this kind of labor. But she worked it, and the water came, and Pete got the bucket line running within 3 minutes, the hands forming up with the automatic efficiency of men who had trained for exactly this, without knowing they were training for it. Ethan was inside the barn. She knew it because she saw him go in, and she did not see him come out, and every second he was in there with the fire spreading on the east wall was a second she was counting without meaning to count it. The horses came out, 3 of them, then a 4th, whites of their eyes showing, moving with the frantic energy of animals that had been genuinely terrified, and Pete and another hand caught their leads and got them to the far fence, and she kept working the pump and counting. And counting. And then Ethan came out. He was carrying something, not a horse, but something from the tack room, a box, and she didn't understand why until later, when she found out that the box contained the original land deed and the water rights documentation that he kept in the barn office. Documents that could not be replaced, and that Carrie's people, if they had set the fire, would have known were there. He was out, but his left arm was wrong. She saw it as he walked back toward the bucket line, the way he held it slightly too close to his body, the way he wasn't using it. She had never seen him not use both hands for work, and the absence of it hit her with a physical force she hadn't anticipated. She left the pump, another hand took it without being asked, and went to him. "Your arm," she said. "It's fine," he said. "Show me your arm, Ethan." He turned to look at her. In the orange light of the burning wall, his face was something she would remember for a long time. The control he was maintaining, the absolute refusal to prioritize himself, while there was still a barn fire and horses loose, the slight brightness in his gray-green eyes that she was almost certain he didn't know was there. He showed her his arm. The burn ran from his wrist to the middle of his forearm. Not deep, she didn't think it was deep, but it was real, and it needed attention, and he was going to ignore it indefinitely if she didn't intervene. "Come with me," she said. "The barn is being handled," she said, "by 8 men who know what they're doing. Come with me." He looked at the barn, then he looked at her. He came with her. She brought him to the kitchen and found the medical tin she had located in her first week and never expected to use. She sat him at the table, and he sat without argument, which told her the arm hurt more than he was willing to say. She worked on it carefully, cleaning the burn and applying what the tin had to offer, and he sat and didn't move and didn't make a sound. "Who do you think said it?" she said, working as she talked, keeping her voice level. "Carrie's people," he said, "or men hired by Carrie's people. There'll be no way to prove it." "The timing," she said. "Night before Graves arrives." "Yes. He knows about Graves. Someone told him." His voice was flat. "The letter went through the Cheyenne Post, not Harlow. But Graves has an office people who talk." He paused. "Or Aldis's visit was watched." "Is this going to stop him?" she said. "The fire. If it was meant to intimidate you into pulling the filing." "No," he said. She looked up from the burn. "No," he said again. "It doesn't stop anything. It tells me he's scared. Men who aren't scared don't burn barns." She held his gaze for a moment. "It could have been worse," she said, carefully. "I know," he said. "If the horses—" "I know Clara." The sound of her name in his voice in this kitchen at this hour was a thing she registered and set aside, because this was not the moment for it, and she understood that, and she believed he understood it too. "The box you carried out," she said. "The documents." "In the front room," he said. "On the table." "I'll file copies with Graves tomorrow," she said. "Before anything else. We need duplicates in a location Carrie can't touch." "Yes," he said. She finished with the burn and wrapped it, and he flexed his fingers once, testing, and nodded. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," she said. Outside, the sounds of the bucket line were changing, the shouts coming slower, less urgent. The fire was being brought down. She could hear it in the voices, the way you could always hear disaster receding in the voices of the people fighting it. She sat across the table from him in the kitchen, and they were both slightly ash-stained and tired, and the lamp was burning low, and outside someone called that the east wall was holding, and the fire was out. He let out a breath that she didn't think he'd meant to let out. It was a small, involuntary thing, and it was the most unguarded she had seen him. She looked at the table. "Aldis was right," she said. "About what?" he said. "That Carrie hasn't found our weakest point." She paused. "He keeps looking in the wrong place. He thinks the weak point is the operation, the cattle, the barn, the water. Something physical he can damage or threaten." She looked at Ethan. "But the case doesn't live in the barn. It lives in what Graves is filing tomorrow, and what Margaret Hollis is willing to say, and what the judge in Cheyenne will see when he reads 40 pages of documented pattern." She paused. "He's been burning the wrong things." Ethan looked at her. "He figured that out tonight," he said quietly. "Burning the barn wasn't about the barn. It was a message." "I know," she said. "Which means the next move is something different," he said. "Something he hasn't tried yet." She met his eyes. "Then we make sure Graves files in the morning," she said. Before Carrie figures out what that something different is. He nodded. They sat in the kitchen for a while longer, the lamp burning between them, the mountain enormous and dark outside, the sound of the men coming back from the barn, drifting in through the walls, and something between them that had no name yet and didn't need one. Not yet. But something. Graves arrived at 7 in the morning. He was younger than Clara had expected, maybe 40, with a precise, unhurried manner and the kind of eyes that read a room before committing to a single expression. He rode up from Harlow with one associate and a saddlebag full of legal documents and took in the remains of the barn's east wall without comment, which told Clara he had been briefed and had already incorporated it into his thinking. Ethan shook his hand in the yard. "The filing," Ethan said. "Can we move today?" "We can move this morning," Graves said. "I reviewed everything you sent. The emergency injunction application is solid. The documented interference with the watercourse. The pattern of escalating harassment. The barn fire. As the most recent incident, a territorial judge will look at this and see exactly what it is." He looked at Ethan's bandaged arm. "That happened last night." "Yes," Ethan said. "Document it," Graves said to Clara, who was standing 3 feet away with a pen already in her hand. "Date, time, nature of injury, connection to the barn fire. I want it sworn and signed before I leave." "It'll be ready in 20 minutes, she said. Graves looked at her properly for the first time. He looked at the pen in her hand and the steadiness in her face, and he made some kind of assessment that she could see him making. "You're Miss Bennett," he said. "Yes, Arthur Graves. I've read your reconstruction of the school finance records." He paused. "It's meticulous." "So I've been told," she said. Something close to a smile crossed his face. "The Hollis woman," he said. "Has she confirmed?" "Aldous is bringing her formal statement today," Clara said. "She'll testify to the existence of the letter requesting falsification of examination results, to the conversation she witnessed, and to the subsequent destruction of that letter by her husband on Carrie's direction." "That's conspiracy to obstruct," Graves said. It came out flat, and certain, the voice of a man identifying something familiar. "The destruction of the letter. If Carrie directed it, that's not just civil misconduct, that's a criminal matter." The yard was quiet for a moment. "Can you use it?" Ethan said. "I can use it to apply pressure we haven't had yet," Graves said. "Criminal referral changes what Carrie is defending against. He's been playing this as a land dispute with a harassment dimension. If the letter destruction becomes a criminal referral, his attorney's calculus changes entirely." He looked at them both. "Let me see everything, all of it. We start in an hour." They went inside. The next 3 hours were the most concentrated work Clara had done since she arrived at the Ridge, which was saying something. She sat across from Graves at the office desk, while his associate took notes, and they went through the entire case. Case from the beginning. Every document, every date, every witness, every gap, where she had reconstruction instead of physical evidence, and needed to be precise about what that meant legally. Graves was fast. He asked questions like a man clearing brush, purposeful, no wasted motion. He did not ask the same question twice. Ethan sat in the corner. He did not speak much, but he was present in the way he was always present, fully, quietly paying attention to everything. At one point, Graves looked up from the reconstruction and said, "Miss Bennett, the original letter from the board chairman, the one that was removed from the schoolhouse." "Yes," she said. "Did you make a copy?" The room was completely still. "I made a copy," she said. Ethan looked at her. "In February," she said, "when I received it. I made a handwritten copy before I filed the original, and I kept the copy in a separate location. Not in the schoolhouse." She paused. "In a tin box I boarded with the laundry woman on the east side of Harlow. Mrs. Fenwick. She has no connection to Carrie or the school board. She didn't know what she was keeping." Graves set down his pen. "You have a copy of the letter," he said. "A handwritten transcription," she said. "In my own hand, with a notation of the date I received the original and the date I made the copy." She looked at him directly. "It won't have the same evidentiary weight as the original, but combined with Margaret Hollis's testimony, confirming the letter existed and describing its content, which my transcription matches precisely, it establishes the substance. Graves looked at her for a long moment. How long have you been planning for the possibility of exactly this kind of proceeding? He said. Since February, she said, when I understood what Thomas Carey was. Graves picked up his pen. We need Mrs. Fenwick's statement confirming she held the tin without knowledge of its contents. We need the transcription retrieved today before Carey learns it exists. He looked at Ethan. Who can go to Harlow right now without drawing attention? Ethan was already standing. Pete Garland, he said. He makes the supply run every week. Nobody looks at him twice. He left the room. Clara heard him in the hall giving Pete instructions in a low, rapid voice. She heard Pete say, "Yes, ma'am," not to her, to Ethan, and almost smiled at the habit. She looked at Graves. He's going to know soon, she said, that we have the copy. Someone will tell him, or he'll piece it together. I'm counting on it, Graves said. She raised her eyebrows. When Carey learns, the letter was copied. Graves said, he'll understand that destroying the original accomplished nothing. And men who discover they've done something at significant risk for nothing, they make mistakes. He wrote something in his notes. I want him to know, but on our timeline, not his. Clara looked at the papers between them. You're going to tell him, she said. Through the appropriate legal channels, Graves said pleasantly. The filing will reference the transcription. He'll read it when his attorney reads it, at which point he'll realize the schoolhouse was entered and the records taken for no purpose, which is a separate trespass issue, and the letter he thought he'd buried is still very much a living document. He looked up. That's when he starts making the kind of decisions that finish cases. Aldous arrived at noon with Margaret Hollis. Clara had expected a frightened woman. She got something more complicated. Margaret Hollis was maybe 50, with a face that had been carrying something heavy for a long time, and when she walked into the kitchen and saw Clara sitting there, she stopped for a moment, and the two women looked at each other. Miss Bennett, Margaret said. Mrs. Hollis, Clara said. Margaret sat down across from her. Aldous stood near the door. Graves's associate had his pen ready. I owe you an apology, Margaret said. You owe me a statement, Clara said. Not unkindly, but directly. The apology can come after. Margaret blinked. Then something in her face shifted. Something like relief, as if she had been expecting to have to manage someone's feelings first and had been given permission to simply speak. She spoke. She told it plainly, and without embellishment, in the voice of a woman who had been over it in her head enough times that the shape of it was clear. Her husband's meeting with Thomas Carey in January. Carey's instruction that the school board manage the situation with the Bennett woman before it became a problem. The drafting of the letter which her husband had done reluctantly, she said, which was the most charitable characterization she could offer, and the delivery of it to Clara. And then 6 days ago, her husband coming home from a meeting with Carey's attorney with the news that the records had been secured, the letter had been retrieved, and that as far as Carey was concerned, the matter was closed. He said the letter was destroyed, Margaret said. He told me that as though it was good news. And you came to Reverend Aldous, Clara said. I came to Reverend Aldous, Margaret said, because I have been sitting in that house for 6 months knowing what was done to you, and I have run out of ways to make it smaller in my head. Her voice was steady, but there was something behind it that had been maintained at some cost. My husband made a choice. I am making a different one. Graves asked her 3 specific questions about the letter's content, the exact language of the request, whether the board chairman had used the word falsify, whether Carey's name had been spoken in connection with the instruction. Margaret answered all 3. The associate's pen moved steadily. Mrs. Hollis, Graves said when she finished, I need to ask you about your husband's position. If you provide this testimony, is he prepared for the consequences? Margaret looked at her hands for a moment. He doesn't know I'm here, she said. The room was quiet. I see, Graves said carefully. He will know by tonight, she said. And he will be angry. And then he will think about it because my husband is not a dishonest man. He made a coward's choice, which is different. And he will understand that this is the only direction that ends somewhere he can live with. She looked up. And if he doesn't understand that on his own, I'll explain it to him." Aldous made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was not quite not one. Graves looked at his associate, who was already preparing the formal statement for Margaret's signature. Clara looked at the table. She felt the case shifting around her like a river changing course. Not dramatically, not with a sound, but undeniably the weight of it, moving towards something that had not been possible 2 weeks ago, or even 2 days ago. She thought about Ethan, who had bought a mortgage note to make this moment possible. She thought about Pete Garland currently riding into Harlow for a tin box from a laundrywoman's shelf. She thought about Danner in the bunkhouse with his splinted leg and his 12 years of memory. She thought about a rusted nail and a letter pinned to a schoolhouse door. She thought about the road east to Cartwell and the 9 miles she had not had to walk. Margaret Hollis signed her statement at 12:47 in the afternoon. Pete came back at 3. He came back fast, which was not his usual pace, and when he came through the door, he had the tin box under his arm and an expression that said something had happened on the road. "What?" Ethan said. "Carrie's men," Pete said. "On the road south. The same one who came up here 2 weeks ago with the inquiry. He was coming north." "Coming here," Ethan said. "I don't know," Pete said. "I passed him going the other way. He looked at me. I kept moving." He held out the tin. "Mrs. Fenwick sent this without asking questions. She's a good woman." Clara took the tin and opened it. The transcription was there. 3 pages in her own hand precisely dated the content of the board chairman's letter, reproduced word for word from memory, and her memory for written words was exact. Always had been one of those particular capacities she had been grateful for all her life, and never more than now. She handed it to Graves. He read it. He set it on the desk and looked at it for a moment with the expression of a man who has just found what he needed and is now reorganizing everything around it. "This matches Hollis's testimony precisely," he said. "It matches the original letter," Clara said. "Because I read it 3 times before I copied it. It's enough," Graves said. "Combined with the statement, the reconstruction, the water rights documentation, and the documented incidents, it's enough." He looked at Ethan. "I'll have the injunction filing ready for tomorrow morning. I'll ride to the district court in Millhaven and file in person. Electronic notice goes to Carrie's attorney of record within 24 hours of filing." "And the criminal referral," Clara said. "I'll include a formal referral to the territorial attorney's office regarding the destruction of evidence and the conspiracy to obstruct," Graves said. "That's a separate track. It moves slower, but it changes what Carrie's attorney tells him about his exposure." Ethan looked at Clara. She looked back at him. Something passed between them. Not words, not anything that required words, just the particular recognition of 2 people who have been fighting in the same direction and have just seen the thing they were fighting toward come into range. Then Ethan looked at Graves. "What do we do tonight?" he said. "Tonight," Graves said, "you do nothing. You let the filing do its work. You document anything that happens, anything at all, and you do not engage Carrie's people under any circumstances." He paused. "The next move is mine, and it moves in court." The next move, as it turned out, was not entirely Graves's. Carrie's man arrived at the Ridge at 5 in the afternoon. He was not the sharp-suited attorney's representative from the first visit. He was someone older, heavier, with the look of a man who had been sent not to intimidate, but to negotiate, which was a different thing entirely, and in some ways more alarming. Ethan met him on the porch. Clara stood inside the door close enough to hear. "Mr. Walker," the man said. "My name is Gerald Webb. I represent Thomas Carey in certain personal business matters." "I know who you are," Ethan said. Webb smiled in the way of men who are used to being known and have made their peace with it. "Mr. Carey has asked me to convey an offer," he said. "He's prepared to withdraw all complaints against Miss Bennett in front of the school board. Full reinstatement to her position. He'll personally advocate for it." He paused. "In exchange for the withdrawal of the territorial court filing." Ethan was quiet. Clara inside the door felt something cold and precise settle over her. She had expected something like this. She had not expected it to come before the filing was even submitted. "He got word of the filing," she said low to herself. Graves, standing 3 feet away, heard her. Faster than I expected, he said quietly, which means he has someone in the district court office. He paused, which is also information. Outside, Ethan said, "Tell me more about the offer, Mr. Webb." Webb smoothed his coat. "The water rights question, Mr. Walker. Mr. Carey is prepared to revise his position. He would accept the current boundary. The creek stays in your operation. The East Channel, the diversion. He'll restore it at his own expense and put it in writing." Still, Ethan said nothing. Webb shifted his weight slightly. "Mr. Carey is a practical man. He's prepared to accept that this particular matter has been more costly than he anticipated, and he's prepared to draw a line under it." "What about the barn?" Ethan said. Webb blinked. "I'm sorry. My barn," Ethan said. "The east wall. The fire that started the night before the attorney I retained arrived." He let that sit for a moment. "I can't prove Carey's people set it. But Mr. Carey is a practical man, as you say. Practically speaking, it needs to be rebuilt." Webb was very still. "I'll convey that to Mr. Carey," he said carefully. "You do that," Ethan said. "While you're at it, you can tell him the answer to his offer is no." Webb's composure held, but just barely. "Mr. Walker, I want to be certain you understand what's being offered." "I understand perfectly," Ethan said. "What I understand that Mr. Carey may not is that what's been done to Miss Bennett doesn't become undone because the school board reverses a decision. The accusations exist. The record in this county exists. Walking back the formal charges doesn't repair that." His voice was flat and completely certain. "The only thing that repairs it is the truth being formally established. In a court. In a record that can't be quietly revised later." Webb looked at him for a long moment. "This will be expensive," he said. It was not a threat. It was, Clara thought, almost a warning, one man telling another man something he thought he should know. "Yes," Ethan said. "It will." Webb left. Ethan came inside. He looked at Graves. "He sent a personal representative," he said, "before the filing is submitted, because he knows the filing is strong," Graves said. "This offer was the last off-ramp before the territorial court makes it a public record." He looked at them both. "He won't offer again. From this point it goes to the court and he fights or he settles on our terms, not his." Clara said, "He'll fight." "Yes," Graves said. "He will." "Then so will we," she said. That night was the quietest night the Ridge had had since Clara arrived. Graves and his associate were in the bunkhouse reviewing the final filing documents. Danner had gone to bed early. Amos had left supper on the stove and done the same. Clara was at the office desk, not working. The work was done, or done enough, but sitting with a cup of tea that was cooling, and the window cracked, and the mountain air coming in with its particular quality of being simply itself, indifferent and clean and enormous. She heard Ethan's boots in the hall, and then he was in the doorway. He looked at her without speaking for a moment. "You should sleep," he said. "I will," she said. "Not quite yet." He came in and leaned against the wall across from the desk, arms folded, which was a posture she had seen him take when he was thinking rather than doing. "How are you?" he said. It was a simple question, not a courtesy question, a real one. She could tell the difference. She thought about it honestly. "I'm afraid," she said. "Not of what happens in court. I think we have what we need. I'm afraid of what comes after. Whether Harlow, whether the people there, whether it matters what the court says. Some things get decided in a courtroom and people still believe what they decided to believe." He nodded. "That's true," he said. "Some people will." "You're not going to tell me it'll all be fine," she said. "No," he said. "I'm not." She looked at her tea. "That's one of the things I—" She stopped. "What?" he said. She looked up at him. The lamp made his face all plains and shadow. The same face she had looked at from the back of a horse on a hot road, the face of a man who had stopped when he didn't have to. "You don't offer things you can't give," she said. "Most people offer comfort in the shape of certainty. You don't." He was quiet. "I reckon that's not always a virtue," he said. "It is," she said. To me. She paused. I had a life I built carefully. I knew what was in it, and what I could count on, and what I was doing it for. Carrie took most of it. She held his gaze. I'm not certain yet what I'm building now. But I know what I've seen in the past 3 weeks. What kind of people are in this house? What kind of place this is? She paused. What kind of man? The room was very still. He pushed off the wall and crossed to the desk and stood in front of it, not far but close, and looked at her with the full, direct, unhurried attention that was his particular quality. Clara, he said. I know, she said. It's not the moment. No, he said. It's not. After, she said. After, he agreed. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he reached out and briefly, deliberately covered her hand where it rested on the desk. Not a romantic gesture, or not only that, but a human one. The particular warmth of one person telling another person, I see you, and I am here. And then he took his hand back and straightened and said, Get some sleep when you can, and walked out. She sat with her hand warm on the desk for a long time. Outside the mountain, did what it always did, existed, enormous and patient, indifferent to the small human proceedings at its feet. The stars above the ridge were very bright. The creek in the north pasture ran in its restored channel, cold and steady, going where it had always gone. Clara thought about the filing that would leave for Millhaven in the morning. She thought about a courtroom in Cheyenne, and a judge named Hargrove, and 40 pages of documented truth. She thought about 13 days, and what could be built in 13 days, and what came after. She finished her tea. She went to bed. And for the first time since the nail had been driven into her door, she slept the whole night through. Graves rode out at first light. Clara stood on the porch and watched him go, his associate beside him, the two of them carrying everything they had built in the past 36 hours down the mountain toward Millhaven and the district court. She watched until they were gone around the first curve in the road, and then she stood there a moment longer in the cool morning air, listening to the creek running in the north pasture. And she thought about what it meant to have done everything you could do and then have to wait for the world to respond. She had never been good at waiting. She went inside and started working. There was still the operational work. The accounts didn't stop because there was a court filing in motion. The buyer correspondence didn't pause for legal proceedings. The grazing rotation records needed updating. She worked through the morning with the focused efficiency she had developed over 3 weeks at this desk, and she was halfway through reconciling the July feed accounts when Pete knocked on the doorframe at 9:30. Writer from Harlow, he said. She looked up. Carrie's. No, ma'am. It's the postmaster. That was unexpected. Send him in, she said. The postmaster was a small man named Feld, who Clara had seen exactly once, standing in the doorway of the post office on the morning she left Harlow. He had watched her go with the expression of a man who had expected something and was watching it confirmed. She had not forgotten that expression. He stood in the office doorway now and held his hat in both hands and looked like a man who had rehearsed something and was hoping the rehearsal was enough. Miss Bennett, he said. Mr. Feld, she said. Sit down. He sat. He put his hat on his knee. He looked at the desk between them. I need to tell you something, he said. About the day the schoolhouse records were taken. She set her pen down. I saw who went in, he said. 2 men. One of them works at Carrie's mill. I know him by sight. The other one I recognized from the investment office. They went in with a key, which means someone gave them a key, and they came out with a box of documents. He swallowed. I wrote down the time and the date when I saw it. I wrote down their names. I've been carrying that piece of paper for 2 weeks. Clara looked at him steadily. Why didn't you come forward sooner? He met her eyes for a moment, and then looked away. Because I have a wife and 3 children, he said. And because Thomas Carey handles the investment note on my building. He stopped. And because I was afraid. And now, she said. Now I heard Webb rode up here yesterday, he said. And Walker turned him away. And I thought about the fact that I've been watching Thomas Carey run this county since 1873, and every time he does something that ought to be stopped, everyone looks at their feet. He put the hat back on his head, and then took it off again. I'm tired of looking at my feet. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I need that piece of paper, Mr. Feld. And I need you to be willing to put your name to a sworn statement." "I know," he said. He reached into his coat and put the paper on the desk. She picked it up, read it. Dates, times, names written in the careful block letters of a man who understood that precision mattered. "Wait here," she said. She went and found Ethan. He read the paper. He looked at Feld through the doorway. "I went and sent a wire to Graves in Mill Haven before the man had been in the house 20 minutes. Graves received the wire at 10:43 and amended the filing before he submitted it at 11:15. He sent word, back up the mountain by the fastest rider he could hire, and Clara read his message at 2 in the afternoon. The amended filing now included eyewitness testimony to the removal of documents from the schoolhouse, the identities of the men who carried out the removal, and a formal request that the district court order the preservation of any documents currently in Thomas Carey's possession related to Harlow County School District finances, which meant that if Carey tried to destroy anything further, he was doing it under a court preservation order, which was a federal offense. She read the wire 3 times. Then she went and found Ethan in the yard where he was working with one of the hands on the fence line, his bandaged arm moving more freely than it had the day before. She walked up to him and held out the wire and said, "Read this." He read it. He looked at her. "Feld," he said. "Feld," she said. Something passed through his face, not triumph, but something adjacent to it. The expression of a man who has believed in something and is watching that belief be confirmed not by one person, but by the slow accumulation of people who have been waiting for permission to be decent. "How many people has Carey been holding down by holding their notes," she said, "in this county?" Ethan folded the wire and handed it back. "I don't know exactly, but I've been hearing about it for 12 years. The mill, the investment office, the grain storage contracts." He paused. He built a system where the only way to do business in Harlow County was to do it through him. "And people let him," she said. "People let him," he said, "until they had more to lose by letting him than by stopping him." He looked at her. "That's what we built. Something that made it possible to stop him." She thought about that. The filing, the injunction, the attorney's fee, the mortgage note he had bought to protect Margaret Hollis. All of it a structure that made it possible for people like Feld to take a piece of paper out of their coat and put it on a desk. "You spent a great deal of money on this," she said. "Yes," he said. "The operation can sustain it." He looked at her with something that was almost amusement. Almost. "Were you just reviewing my accounts for the past 3 weeks?" "Yes," she said. "Then you already know the answer." She did. The Walker Ridge outfit was profitable and conservatively managed and had no debts beyond the ordinary operational costs that any summer grazing operation carried. He had spent significantly on the legal proceedings and the mortgage note and the barn repair, and the operation would feel it, but it would not break it. "I know the answer," she said. "I wanted to hear you say it wasn't a reckless decision." "It wasn't a reckless decision," he said. "It was a calculated one." "What did you calculate?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. "That some things are worth what they cost," he said. She held his gaze. The yard around them was full of ordinary summer sounds. The hands working the cattle moving in the far pasture, the creek doing its steady work to the north. "Go back to the fence," she said. "I'll have the accounts updated before supper." He went back to the fence. She went back to the office. She was smiling when she sat down, and she let herself do it because there was no one there to see it, and because it felt like something she had not done enough of in a long time. 6 days passed before the next word came from Graves. 6 days was not a long time in legal terms. It was a considerable time when you were living on a mountain with an ongoing operation and a case in motion, and a man who worked 12-hour days outside and came in for supper with the particular quality of presence that made a room feel different when he entered it. Clara noticed that. She had been noticing it since the first night, and she had been precise with herself about what she did and did not do with the noticing. She was not a woman who confused gratitude for something larger or proximity for understanding. or the particular comfort of a place where she was trusted for something more than that. But she also was not a woman who lied to herself. On the third evening, she was in the office late when he brought her coffee. Not Pete this time, but Ethan himself, which was not a thing he had done before. He set it on the corner of the desk and stood there a moment. "You don't have to do the operational work at night," he said. "The accounts can wait until morning." "I know," she said. "I like it. It's quiet." He looked at the lamp and the papers and her handwriting covering the current page. "What are you actually working on?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Letters," she said, "to the families of the children I taught." She glanced up at him. 17 families. I've written to them all, telling them what happened and why, telling them what the truth is." She paused. "They deserve to know. Whatever the court decides, those families made their opinion about me based on what Carrie's people put in front of them. I'm not willing to let that stand without at least putting the truth in front of them directly." Ethan sat down in the chair across the desk. "You think they'll believe you?" he said. "Some of them will," she said. "Some of them won't. Some of them will wait and see what the court says and then decide." She met his eyes. "But when I was teaching their children, I told them that truth matters even when it's inconvenient. I'd be a fraud if I didn't act accordingly." He looked at her with that quality of full attention. "You're going back to teaching," he said. It wasn't a question. Not quite. "It's what I do," she said simply. "Not necessarily Harlow, not necessarily this county, but somewhere. Children need teachers who actually know what they're doing, and I know what I'm doing." He nodded. She looked at the letter in front of her. "The season ends in September," she said, carefully without looking up. "That's what the employment document says." "Yes," he said. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "That's 6 weeks away," she said. "Clara," he said. She looked up. "We said after," he said. "I know," she said. "I wasn't—" She stopped. "I was just noting the calendar." "I know what you were doing," he said. And there was something in his voice, quiet and certain and unhurried, that told her he was not troubled by the question of what came after. That he had his own accounting of it, and was not alarmed by what the figures showed. She looked at him for a long moment. "After," she said. "After," he said. He stood and went out, and she went back to her letters, and she wrote until the lamp burned low, and the mountain night was at its deepest and stillest, and she felt something in her chest that was not the tight wound thing it had been for months, but something else, something that had more room in it, more air, more of the future in it than the past. Graves's letter arrived on the 7th morning. It was long and precise, and Clara read it standing at the office window, not sitting down, which was how she read things that mattered. The emergency injunction had been granted. Thomas Carey was ordered to cease all interference with the natural watercourse known as Walker Creek, to restore any diverted flow at his own expense, and to preserve all documents in his possession related to the Harlow County School District and to Clara Bennett's employment therein, pending the full territorial court hearing scheduled for the 14th of September in Cheyenne. Additionally, the territorial attorney's office had received Graves's criminal referral and had opened a preliminary inquiry into the destruction of evidence. The 2 men Feld had identified entering the schoolhouse were named in the inquiry. The board chairman, whose name was written in the referral with the same flat precision Graves applied to everything, had retained his own attorney the previous day. And Thomas Carey, according to Graves's last paragraph, had been advised by his attorney that the position he was in was considerably more exposed than he had understood it to be in June, and that the most prudent course of action was to discuss settlement terms before the September hearing made everything a matter of permanent public record. Clara set the letter on the desk. She sat down. She sat there for what was probably 2 minutes, though it felt both shorter and longer than that, and she let herself understand what the paper in front of her meant. Not just the legal mechanics of it, she understood those clearly, but the weight of it. 6 months of carrying something alone. 3 weeks of building something with people who had chosen to build it with her. An entire county's machinery deployed against her, and the machinery had not won. She picked the letter up and walked out of the office. Ethan was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the grazing rotation schedule, which he studied in the mornings before going out. He looked up when she came in. She set Graves's letter in front of him. He read it. He read it all the way through every paragraph without rushing. She watched his face while he read. When he finished, he set it down. "The injunction," he said. "Yes," she said. "Carrie's attorney is discussing settlement." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "It's not over," he said. "No," she said. "September is still the hearing, and the criminal inquiry is separate and slower. And even if Carrie settles, the record in this county doesn't change overnight." She paused. "But the injunction is formal and public, and it means he has to stop. Right now, today, he has to stop. And everything that comes after has to happen with that fact in place." Ethan looked at the letter. "Danner," he said. "He should see it," she agreed. Ethan went to the bunkhouse door and called for Danner. He came in on his crutch, slower than usual, because the morning was cold, and he sat at the table and read the letter, and when he finished he said, which was the most emphatic sound she had heard from him. "He's going to settle," Danner said. "Graves thinks so," Clara said. "Graves is right. Carrie's been in this county for 30 years by being the smartest man in the room. The minute he's not the smartest man in the room, he cuts his losses and recalculates." He looked at Clara. "He'll give you the reinstatement. He'll give you the formal clearing of the record. He might even make the school board issue a public statement if Graves pushes for it." "I don't want the reinstatement," Clara said. Both men looked at her. "I don't want to go back to a school board that had me removed at Thomas Carey's direction," she said. "Whatever a settlement says, I know what those men did. I know what they would do again if the circumstance was convenient." She looked at the letter. "What I want is the public record cleared, the accusations formally withdrawn, and I want the full territorial court hearing to proceed, regardless of whether Carey settles on the land and water question." "You want the criminal inquiry to continue," Ethan said. "I want the truth on record," she said, "in a court, where it can't be quietly revised." Ethan looked at her. "I'll write to Graves this morning," he said. "Those are the terms." The response from Carrie's attorney came 8 days later. It was not a capitulation. Lawyers never wrote capitulations. They wrote conditional frameworks for mutually agreed resolution, but it was in substance everything. Carey would accept the permanent injunction on the water rights. Walker Creek would remain in the Walker operation in perpetuity, documented and recorded with the Territorial Land Office. Carey would withdraw all complaints against Clara Bennett, would direct the school board to issue a formal statement clearing her record, and would make no further claims against her reputation or employment in any county in the territory. The barn reconstruction would be funded by an anonymous donation to a county infrastructure account, which everyone understood perfectly, and the criminal inquiry, which Carey's attorney had attempted to have included in the settlement, and which Graves had flatly refused, would proceed on its own track, independent of any civil settlement. The board chairman had already provided a statement to the territorial attorney's office. The two men Feld had identified had also provided statements under the particular motivation of men who had been told clearly what their exposure was. Thomas Carey himself had not yet provided a statement. Graves wrote that he expected that situation to change. Clara read the settlement terms at the office desk on a late August afternoon with the window open and the mountain air coming in, and Ethan standing in the doorway, because he had brought her coffee again the second time he had done this, and likely not the last. "He accepted all our terms," she said. "Yes," Ethan said. "He fought everything for 6 months and then accepted every term." "When you're no longer the smartest man in the room," Ethan said, "you cut your losses and recalculate." She looked up at him. "You've been talking to Danner." "I've been talking to Danner for 9 years," he said. "Some of it sticks." She felt the laugh come before she could choose to produce it, or not a real one. Genuine, the kind she had not had in a long time. He heard it, and his face did the thing it did, the small particular thing, the adjustment that was not quite a smile, but was in the same family as one. She looked at the settlement document. "It's over," she said. And then more quietly, "It's over." "The court hearing's still September," he said. "I know, but this..." She touched the document. "This is the part where he admits he lost. Everything after this is the formal record, which matters, but... She stopped. Clara, he said. I'm all right, she said. I'm more than all right. I just need a moment. He came in and sat across the desk Danner's chair, the chair she had come to think of as the chair where people sat when they had something real to say, and he folded his hands on the desk and waited. She took her moment. 6 months of carrying it, 3 weeks of fighting it, a rusted nail and a letter, and 9 miles of hot road, and a man who had ridden down a mountain because he couldn't just ride past. She looked at Ethan Walker across the desk. What happens now? She said. The hearing is September 14th in Cheyenne, he said. Graves wants us both there. Me for the water rights testimony, you for the record clearing. He paused. 3 weeks. And the operation, she said. Season ends 1st of October. The crew goes down, the cattle follow the 2nd week. He looked at his hands. The ridge goes quiet in winter. She understood the shape of what he was not saying, and she appreciated that he was not saying it because it needed to be her who said it. September 14th, she said. And then Cheyenne. Yes. I've never been to Cheyenne, she said. It's a real city, he said. Bigger than Harlow by a considerable margin. Are there schools there? She said. He met her eyes. Good ones, he said. The territory's been building them out. They need teachers. He paused. They especially need teachers who can manage a school board. She held his gaze. That's a long way from the ridge, she said. 40 miles, he said, which is not very far when you have a fast horse and a reason to cover the distance. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back at her with the same quality of patience he brought to everything. Not passive, not indifferent, but genuinely, completely willing to let things arrive in their own time. You said after, she said. Yes, he said. It's after, she said. Something moved across his face. Not the small adjustment, something larger, something that had been waiting behind the adjustments for 3 weeks and was now allowed to be visible. Yes, he said. It is. She reached across the desk and covered his hand the way he had covered hers weeks ago. In this same room, the same deliberate and human warmth of one person telling another, I see you and I am here. He turned his hand over and held hers. They stayed like that for a moment, 2 people at a desk in a mountain office with the window open and the summer light coming in, and the accounts finished, and the case won, and the future entirely unwritten. Then she said, I should finish the correspondence. You should, he said. But neither of them moved for a little while longer. September 14th came with clear skies and Cheyenne ahead of them, and Graves waiting on the courthouse steps, with the precise, unhurried manner that Clara had come to associate with men who knew the weight of what they were carrying and did not need to perform it. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Judge Hargrove was 60 years old and had been sitting the territorial bench for 15 of them, and he had, as Graves had predicted, read the filing and seen exactly what it was. He asked his questions without theater, listened to the answers with complete attention, and made his rulings at the close of the hearing with the directness of a man who had no interest in ambiguity. The water rights injunction was made permanent. Walker Creek was formally recorded as the exclusive right of the Walker Ridge outfit in perpetuity. The settlement terms regarding Clara Bennett were entered into the territorial record and given full legal standing, which meant that the accusations against her, the complaints before the school board, and the discharge from her position were formally documented as having been without factual basis and were expunged from any record that would follow her. And the territorial attorney's office announced in the corridor outside the courtroom after the hearing that Thomas Carey had provided a statement the previous afternoon. Clara heard that last part from Graves, who said it with the contained satisfaction of a man who had expected it and was nonetheless pleased to be right. She stood in the corridor of the Cheyenne Territorial Courthouse, and she held that news still in her hands for a moment, the way you held something you had been trying to reach for a long time and had finally touched. Ethan stood beside her. Did you know, she said to Graves, that he would provide the statement before the hearing? I expected it, Graves said. When a man understands that the people around him have already spoken, the calculation changes. He can either be the last one talking, or he can be the one who spoke when it mattered. He paused. Carrie chose the former in every case for 30 years. Eventually, even that calculus reverses. "Will it be enough," she said, "for the criminal inquiry?" "The inquiry will run its course," Graves said. "I won't promise you an outcome, but what I will tell you is that the territorial attorney now has testimony from the board chairman, from the 2 men who entered the schoolhouse from Carrie himself, and from 3 witnesses external to Carrie's operation, including Mrs. Hollis and Mr. Feld." He looked at her directly. "The truth doesn't always win as fast as it should, but in this case, it has the documentation it needs." She nodded. She looked at Ethan. He was watching her with the quiet, unhurried attention she had spent 3 weeks learning to read, and what she read in it now was something simple and clear. A man who had brought her this far, and was interested in what came next, and was not in a hurry, and was not going anywhere. "Let's go home," she said. He tilted his head slightly. The question in the tilt was gentle, not pointed. "The ridge," she said. "For now." "For now," he agreed. They rode back up the mountain in the early afternoon with the light coming down at the angle it came in September, lower and more golden than July, the aspens just beginning to think about turning. Clara sat behind Ethan on the way she had on the first day, and she looked at the mountains around them and thought about how different they looked now than they had in July. Not the mountains themselves, but her relationship to them. She knew this terrain now. She knew the creek and the north pasture and the ridge above, and the particular quality of the air at elevation in the early morning. She knew the people in the house at the end of this road. "Danner will want a full account," she said. "He'll have questions written down," Ethan said. "He's been thinking about it all day." "Pete will want to know about the courthouse," she said. "He's never been to Cheyenne." "Nobody on my crew has been to Cheyenne," Ethan said. "We'll have supper and you can tell them." She was quiet for a moment. "I wrote to a school in Cheyenne," she said, "before the hearing, asking about positions." He didn't tense. He didn't change the pace of the horse. "Did they write back?" he said. "Not yet," she said. "But I expect they will." She paused. "I also wrote to the families in Harlow. All 17 of them. I told them the hearing was today, and what I expected to come of it, and I told them that regardless of what they thought of me, their children deserved a teacher who was there for the right reasons, and I hoped whoever taught their children next was that kind of teacher." "That's generous," he said. "It's honest," she said. "Which is different." She paused. "3 of the families wrote back before I left." He waited. "They want me to come back," she said. "Not to the county school to teach their children privately. A small thing. 4 children between 3 families." She felt something move in her throat. "They said their children asked after me." The horse moved beneath them, steady on the climbing road. "Clara," Ethan said. "I'm not going to cry," she said. "I know," he said. She was quiet for the rest of the climb, and he let her be quiet. And the mountain did what it always did. Existed enormous and patient holding. Everything at its feet with the same impartial permanence it had held for 10,000 years before any of them arrived, and would hold for 10,000 after they were gone. But the creek ran in its channel. The grass in the north pasture was thick from a full season's water. The barn's east wall was rebuilt, and the wood was new and clean against the older timber. Some things changed by human hands stayed changed. Supper that night was louder than usual. Pete wanted every detail of Cheyenne and asked 3 follow-up questions for every answer. Danner had indeed written his questions down and worked through them in order, and Amos produced a meal that was better than the occasion strictly required, which was his way of marking something important. Aldous had sent a note that arrived while they were gone, and Clara read it aloud at the table because it was addressed to everyone at the Ridge, which she thought was exactly right. It said, "What was done in Harlow was not done in my county's name, though it was done in my county. What has been undone is, I am grateful to every person at that table." Pete looked at the note. "Is that the preacher?" he said. "Yes," Clara said. "He writes well," Pete said with the admiring tone of someone encountering a skill they didn't possess and were glad existed in the world. "Yes," Clara said. "He does." Later, when the table was cleared and Danner had gone to bed, and Pete and the other hands had drifted back to the bunkhouse, and Amos had done his cleaning and gone. Clara and Ethan were the last two in the kitchen. The lamp was low. The window was dark. Outside, the first September cold had arrived, the mountain announcing the end of summer with the particular clarity of altitude. "I'm going to stay through October," she said. "I know," he said. "The accounts need to be closed out properly for the season, and the end-of-season correspondence with the buyers." Holbrook confirmed the fall contract, and there are 2 new buyers Danner brought in that need formal relationship letters. "Yes," he said. "After October." She stopped. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "You don't have to account for it," he said. "Not to me. Whatever you decide and wherever you go, you don't owe me an accounting." He held her gaze. "I told you it was after. It's after. What I feel about that doesn't put conditions on your life." She felt something enormous and quiet happen in her chest. "I know that," she said. That's part of it, Ethan. That's part of what I—" She stopped again. She was not usually a woman who couldn't find words. She found that she did not mind here with him. 40 miles isn't far, she said, when there's a reason to cover the distance. He looked at her with everything he was. The man who had built something alone out of mountain land, who did not talk about it as an accomplishment, but simply as a fact, who had ridden down into a town because he couldn't just ride past, who had bought a mortgage note and hired an attorney and covered her hand with his in a lamplit office and said 13 days with a precision that meant everything. "No," he said. "It's not." She reached across the table and took his hand properly. This time, not briefly, not as a gesture, just held it the way 2 people hold each other's hands when they have been through something together and are standing at the beginning of something else. He held hers back. Outside, the mountain stood enormous and dark and patient. In the September night, its peaks invisible in the dark, its presence absolute and indifferent and permanent. Below it, the creek ran cold and clear in its proper channel. The cattle moved in the north pasture. The new wood on the barn wall was silver in the moonlight, and inside, in a kitchen that smelled of wood smoke and coffee, 2 people who had found each other at the end of a very hard road sat together in the quiet and let the future be what it was going to be. Not rushed, not promised away, not smaller than it deserved to be. Just possible. Open. Theirs. Clara Bennett had come to the ridge with a satchel and a straight back and a name that a powerful man had spent 6 months trying to destroy. She was leaving eventually when October came and the season closed, and the road called her forward with that name restored, documented permanent in the territorial record of the state of Wyoming. And she was leaving with something else too. Something that had no entry in any ledger and needed none. Some things you didn't account for. You simply carried them forward carefully into whatever came next. And whatever came next for Clara Bennett and Ethan Walker began right here in the particular warmth of a hand held in the particular quiet of 2 people who had earned each other honestly in the light of a lamp burning low in a mountain house, while the world outside went on being enormous and indifferent and full always of the possibility of something good. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.